All right, and welcome back to the beginnings of World War II. So today we're going to be looking at Joseph Stalin, Benito Mussolini, Hideki Tojo, and Adolf Hitler, the dictators of World War II. So there's going to be a lot of good information in here today. You're definitely going to want to make sure you pay attention to this video. So starting out, the new governments that are rising after World War I. We have a lot of political and economic depression and instability going on in places around the world at this time. And it's going to help with these guys that I've already mentioned the names of rise to power. All right, so starting out in the Soviet Union, also known as the USSR, we have communism just really being anchored in to the former Russian Empire, now the Soviet Union. So the guy who gets it all going, Vladimir Lenin, basically when he dies, Stalin takes over. He was like the right-hand man of Lenin, right? So he becomes the new dictator, and he wants to create the perfect communist state. So basically following Marxism as closely as he can. It doesn't work out that way because of human greed, but that's his initial goal. But he transforms it into a totalitarian state, which is basically a dictatorship where everyone answers to him, and if someone does something he doesn't like, he has their head blown off. All right. Controls every aspect of people's lives, whether it's public or private. No freedoms at all under communism. Right, so some of the policies that Stalin would put in place. There's a secret police known as the KGB. All right. Basically, they're spying on their own people. Anybody who steps out of line even for a second, they get arrested, interrogated. At the very least, they get imprisoned. At the extreme, of course, execution. Typically, it would be a bullet to the head. All right. They would read people's mail. They would tap phone lines. They had informants all over the place. That type of stuff. So people were brainwashed to the point where children would even rat out their parents just for something they said around the house that was a little off color. People were constantly in fear. Now, something that he does is called the Great Purge. The Great Purge, beginning in 1937, basically eliminated anyone who could threaten Stalin's power in any way, shape, or form. So this would be anywhere between 8 and 13 million deaths so that he could solidify his power and control over the Soviet Union. Here's a little example of just some of the atrocities of the Great Purge, just piles of dead bodies in places because of their political ideals or their just open defiance of Stalin's power. All right. Stalin's 5-year plan. This is basically the idea of an economic overhaul. So basically stimulate the economy, get it more industrialized because they were typically agricultural before this. So he wants to make them a modern nation. So high amounts of output for resources such as steel, coal, iron, oil, electricity, all of these things, so they can make, all the stuff that the modern industrial countries of Europe, like Britain and France and Germany, the United States, all those places, what they're capable of doing, he wants to bring that to the Soviet Union. All right. But he's also not helping out the regular people with the everyday stuff. All right. So we have a lot of shortages of housing, food, and clothing. So people are even just starving to death and freezing to death because they don't have that type of supplies out there. And that would also be a part of that 8 to 13 million deaths during the Great Purge. You could account some of that to this. They did not reach the goals that were set because the Soviet Union, they just did not have the capabilities to do it. Anybody who was smart enough to get these things accomplished in the Soviet Union, a lot of them fled. A number of them were also executed during the purge. So it doesn't really help you if you're executing your country's most intelligent people because they might disagree with you on a few political ideas. All right, so the farming. They start to seize lots and lots of farms over the years after they take power in 1917. All right, so now it's collective farming. People are farming for the greater good of the country, not for themselves. All right, the food was basically produced in factories. It all goes into one place and then it gets dispersed to the people. Anybody who protested was dealt with harshly, typically with the end of a bullet. Now, they are in the 30s a totalitarian, a dictatorship regime, and they are a growing industrial power. They are recognized for it. It's just not to the degree Stalin wanted, but they are a power to be reckoned with. He was unopposed, obviously, because he had anybody who opposed him killed. He allowed no creativity because he saw it as a threat. Because individualism, if people have their own identity, they have their own ideas, and they cause problems by speaking out against something they don't understand or agree with. So if you don't allow creativity, people fall in line like drones, basically, and they give the obedience that you want. It's brainwashing. So, yeah, that is basically what's going on in the Soviet Union. So now let's take a look at Italy with this guy here, Benito Mussolini. So this is where fascism really takes hold. People who lost faith in democracies after the Great Depression, they're looking for answers. So they're wanting an extreme system of government, which is fascism. It is a very extreme government system. Nationalism, one of the big issues that started World War I. Fascism is an extreme form of nationalism. It's like uber pride in your country where no one is better than us. We will rise and defeat everyone. We will conquer the world types of ways of thinking. All right. They promised to bring the economy back, responsible those who caused all of these economic and social hard times, bringing order and pride back to the country. They are very militant, similar to communism, but they have very distinct differences to them. Lots of loyalty and obedience to who's in charge. Not as much living in fear as the communist state of Stalin was using, but it still was there as well. So we have Mussolini. He founds the Fascist Party just after World War I ended. All right. He wanted to bring the economy back, rebuild the army because, the army just sucked during World War I. Let's just face it. All right. His secret police and his followers were called black shirts because they wore black shirts. All right, in 1922, he and his supporters overthrow the king of Italy, Victor Emmanuel III, and Mussolini is put in charge. So, out of these dictators we talk about today, he's actually the one who got into power first and had the longest reign of being in charge. All right. Now, the king, he's like, oh, right, if I don't allow this, I'm dead. So here you go. Here's the keys to Italy. I'm out. All right. He had the nickname Il Duce, which means leader. All right. Democracy was outlawed and other political parties besides the Fascist Party were outlawed. So you're either fascist or nothing. All right, secret police was used to root out and eliminate any rivals of any kind. And he wanted to recreate basically the glory of the Roman Empire. And of course, I don't know how this one works exactly, but the first big thing is let's invade Ethiopia, which is like Central Eastern Africa, and take over there. That was kind of a mess. It was kind of a evenly matched fight, even though the Italians are using rifles and armored vehicles and things like that, and half of the Ethiopians are using spears and shields still. Yeah, still shows that the Italian army at this time did not have a whole lot going for it. All right, let's take a look at Japan. Here we have Hideki Tojo, military dictator of Japan during the war. All right, so Japan is kind of moving in a democratic way. They sign a treaty respecting China's borders outside of the territory that they already have taken over from China. 1928, we get the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which is basically some trade and border stuff, trying to solidify things. No more war going on. As long as everything stayed peaceful, the civilian government kept its power. But we're going to see a rise because of the weaknesses of the Depression and what it did to the governments that were already in place. So the Depression equals civilians blaming the democratic government for the issues because it was a newer form of government. We didn't have these problems before democracy came to Japan. Why do we still need democracy if we're having issues now? That's the way they're thinking. So this would allow military leaders such as Hideki Tojo to gain control of the government. So the emperor, much like earlier on in its history, the emperor would just be a symbol, but all the power was actually the people behind the emperor, such as the generals and the other politicians. So the emperor, his name was Hirohito. He was a young man, easily manipulated by Tojo, who was like the top general in Japan at this time. All right, here's some pictures so you can identify them a little easier. Now, with Japan, they are experiencing a large industrial revolution in the early 1900s. So, they need more raw materials like iron ore, which is like the rocks that contain, oxidized iron and all. So in it, they need to ship that into their factories so they can make steel out of it, so they can build things. They need oil to fuel all of the new industrial products that are coming out so they can make gas, all that type of stuff. And where are those things? They are in other parts of Asia that they don't control already. Like a lot of raw materials are in Manchuria, a northeastern part of China, and also in the Philippines, and especially in Indonesia. So how are they going to get these raw materials? Expansion and invasion of their neighbors. Is anybody going to oppose them? Let's find out. And will it actually matter? Yes, it does matter. So, expansion. The military leaders focus on nationalism, national pride. We are the Japanese Empire. We are something to be proud of. We're going to make the world regret ever slighting us at the Treaty of Versailles. Right? Economic expansion and also expanding the borders. We're going to bring Japan's greatness to the rest of the world. These are the types of things they're saying to the people to get the support that they want and need. So they're going to start invading Manchuria, big raw material center in China. So they attacked, they win, they set up a puppet government there, and basically get whatever they need from Manchuria. All right, this is one of the first big challenges of the League of Nations, and it, of course, flops. All right, they're going to also invade just China in general. So they are going to have a border dispute, which is going to start war with China. So technically, you could say World War II began in 1937 when Japan goes to war with China. It's not the official beginning. That's in September 1939 with Germany's invasion of Poland. But technically, you could say that this is when World War II actually began. Northern China, so a big chunk of northern China actually falls under Japanese control because of this. Japan takes control of Korea for yet another time during history. So all of this red is, as of 1942, the biggest expansion that Japan conquered during World War II. So this is as far as they got, and then the Allies, us, the British, the Australians, the Chinese, then we start pushing them further, closer and closer back to mainland Japan. So Japan emerges as a world power after World War I, and they begin to aggressively expand in Asia. They want to control all of Asia, and they even would have plans eventually to try and invade the United States. And we'll be talking about that more when we talk about the actual fighting in the Pacific. But now let's switch gears, and we're going to talk about Germany for a little while. And this gentleman right here, Adolf Hitler. All right. So, as we've already talked about, Germany has all these debts, the reparations for war in World War I. So they're printing more money so that they can, pay these bills, but that also devalues what the money is worth. All right. So we have inflation, where you need more money to buy the same thing. So what costs you $3 one day, a month or two later might cost you $1,000. All right, so they print even more money to try and fix this. Some problems just can't be fixed by throwing money at it. This is an example of why. All right. So here's an example. In 1918, 160 marks could get you a loaf of bread. Less than a mark in 1918. In 1922, just 4 years later, it's 160 marks. A mark is basically a German dollar. And in 1923, just 1 year after that, 200 billion marks for a loaf of bread. People would literally be taking wheelbarrows of money, just stacks of it piled in a wheelbarrow, to a supermarket just to get bread and milk and maybe a piece of meat. And that's it. The picture that I showed last time, the woman looked like she had a bunch of money and she was putting it into the wall. That was a fireplace. She was burning it to keep her house warm because it was so valueless. All right, so this really is going to cause the German people to question the Weimar Republic, which is a democratic government that was set up in Germany after the German Empire fell. And Kaiser Wilhelm II his throne was taken away. So this is a small transition government, basically, that's in place from the empire to when the Nazis come into power, because these guys were just given the raw deal to try and run this country. So Hitler is going to use all of these problems to manipulate people and eventually take control in the 1930s. So yeah, here's another example of why it was so valueless. Like, you could just give it and the kids could use it as building blocks. Now, attempts to change. Germany was somewhat able to recover because of the Charles Dawes Act. He was an American banker who wanted to try and help Germany recover. Basically, $200 million loan from American banks to try and stabilize the German currency and help to try, hopefully, get Germany's economy to start to recover so that they could then get back on track. That would not really work, but it also would set a realistic schedule for getting repayments out for the war debt, so that maybe they won't be in debt. They'll be in debt longer, but it won't keep them economically crippled the way that they are. Right? And also, with giving this loan, it could show people that, well, other loaning firms around the world, that Germany's not a lost cause. You won't lose out if you give them money to try and fix them, because, hey, if the US is doing it, maybe it's not so bad. But then this is going to happen, the rise of Nazism. So at the same time that these plans are trying to go into place, Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini are taking control in different areas of Europe. So actually, Mussolini is in control of Italy. He's solidifying his power. Hitler is watching this happen. He's like, I want to do that here. So he does. In 1919, he is actually going to try and start he's getting involved with a right-wing political group called the Nazis. The National Socialist German Workers' Party, known as the Nazis. All right, so what they believe is the Treaty of Versailles should be overturned because it's unfair and it punishes Germany too harshly. They are against communism. They want to set up a militia, and they would have their members called stormtroopers or brown shirts, much like Mussolini's black shirts. And eventually, because of his charisma and his explosive and fiery rhetoric, his way of talking and giving speeches, Hitler becomes the leader of the party very quickly. All right? And it gets very inspired by Mussolini. It's like his political idol is basically what Mussolini is. Is like, what Mussolini's doing, I need to do this too. He did it and he was successful. I can do this and I can be successful here in Germany. All right. So he goes to Munich, which is one of the biggest and most prominent cities in southern Germany. And he is going to do what is called the Beer Hall Putsch, where he is basically trying to start a revolution in a big bar in the city of Munich. He gets arrested and goes to prison for a sentence of 5 years, but he's out after 9 months. And that is where he writes his autobiography / political goals and system and all that, Mein Kampf, which is basically translating to My Struggle, and it gives the beliefs and goals for Germany that Hitler has. And this is where we get his idea of the Aryans, the master race that Germany is descended from, and that all peoples outside of Germans are inferior, and they are Untermenschen, the undesirables. Also that Germany needed more Lebensraum, which means living space. They need more lands to conquer so that they can provide more food and grow their population and all things such as that. And how do we do that? We conquer Eastern Europe and Russia. It's a lot of open space, a lot of farmland out there. So why not take it for Germany's prosperity? That's his idea. So in 1932, the Nazis are the largest political party in Germany. All right. They get Hitler elected. He becomes the chancellor, which is how he then absorbs the prime minister position into the chancellery, and he becomes the head of the government, making a totalitarian state. So he is now the dictator. So just like what is going on in communist Soviet Union and fascist Italy, we are seeing the government control every part of public and private life, no freedoms unless the big guy says so. So he's using the newspapers, writing of any kind, so press, literature, propaganda, film, everything to glorify Hitler and the Nazis and what they are doing for Germany. Right? Any books that do not follow the ideals of Nazis are burned. The church officials, they're basically warned at gunpoint, do not question the Nazis. You are to side with us on everything or else. And then we have, of course, just like any other totalitarian state, the secret police, the Gestapo. And they are hunting down anybody who disagrees with the Nazis and Hitler, and they are dealing with them. So we get complete control over the economy by the Nazis. Millions of people are put to work building highways, making weapons, getting into the military, rebuilding all of that. And, nobody's trying to stop them outside of Germany. And then, of course, we have what happens here, the war on the Jewish people. Very, very strong anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish. So a lot of hatred of the Jews, and that is a big part of the Nazi ideology. So blaming them for all the problems Germany suffered after World War I, basically calling all Jews traitors to the German people, and how they caused the economy to collapse because they control the banks, all that type of stuff. So he then, in 1933, once he is the chancellor, the big guy in charge of the government, he starts passing anti-Jew laws, taking away lots of their rights as people. All right. Start to get into the idea of Lebensraum a little more once he's in charge. Trying to get that living space for Germany, trying to take back territories that were stolen from Germany as a result of World War I. So first, Germany, they mobilized their army that they have secretly built back up. So it's well over 100,000 men. So there's like the League of Nations, what they do with this is they write an angry letter. Doesn't go anywhere. So in March 1936, they invade the Rhineland. And if you remember, which you should, the Rhineland is basically their industrial center in Western Germany along the border with France. Nobody stops them. There's like, all right, if they gain full control of that back, maybe they'll stop there. You don't do that with someone like Hitler. He just wants to keep taking and taking until somebody actually tries to stop him. All right, next, with the German reoccupation of the Rhineland, so this is like the first step in war actually being about to break out because, troops are on the move now. So he gains a lot of confidence because like, hey, this is the biggest gamble. We would not have been able to survive a war at this point if Britain and France attacked us because we sent, a small army to retake the Rhineland. But they didn't, so, what else can I get away with? And because he did this unopposed, the people loved him even more than they already did in Germany. So, with the Rhineland no longer as a buffer between Belgium and France and Germany, the doors are basically open for attack. So, November 1937, Hitler creates what is called the Third Reich, the Third German Empire. The first one would be Charlemagne's. The second one would be the German Empire of, World War I. And this would be the Third German Empire. Right? He would eventually absorb Austria and, at least at first, part of Czechoslovakia and then eventually all of Czechoslovakia. But first it would be the Sudetenland. That is a area of Czechoslovakia that is populated by a lot of German people. And Hitler's reasoning behind this is he wants to consolidate, unify all the German peoples of Europe. So the Czechs, they ask for France's help because this violates the Treaty of Versailles, because Germany is on the move. They're being expansionist. They're being aggressive again. We don't want this. So Germany, we have the solid red. All the areas that Hitler takes over initially before 1939 are all the white and red lined sections. So we have the Rhineland in the west, right over here near the border with France and Belgium. We have Austria, which, there is almost no difference at all. German is the dominant language in Austria, after all. And the Sudetenland is actually, you see the solid red line in the Czechoslovakia. The area between that red line and the solid red of Germany is the Sudetenland. That's where a lot of German people are living, but inside of Czechoslovakia. He wants that land, and he eventually takes like roughly half of Czechoslovakia over in general. Now, Treaty of Versailles worsened economic and political conditions in Europe, and this would be what gives rise to the dictators in places like Italy and Germany, especially those two, because it was already happening in Soviet Union, and it kind of just happened more naturally in Japan. But that is going to do it for today. Next time, we will start with the beginning of actual World War II. So be sure to check that out because you're going to need to know that information. Talk to you later, guys.